Hello and welcome to Mr. C's History, and today I'm walking like an Egyptian around London to see sites associated with the ancient Egyptians. Now obviously I will be coming here to the British Museum where there are lots of sites, but it's pretty busy in there and we'll be going well in to try and get close to things. So I want to see if I can get any closer. I also want to see if I can find places that are inspired by ancient Egypt, because I think there are histories of London where we've had Egypt mania. So come along and with me to see ancient Egyptian London. I've made my way to the embankment to look at Cleopatra's Needle, what is standing behind me very proud here. Now, I've gone away from the main road. It's very loud and very busy over there. Just to tell you a bit about this and how this memorial came about and the history of it and why it's here in London. Well, it was built about 1500 BC under the orders of the pharaoh Thutmose III. And it was built as part of the Sed festival, which is his celebration of his sort of jubilee, as it were. And he was a long-standing pharaoh. And it's actually a part of a pair. There should be two of them. The other one, unfortunately, is not in Egypt. It's not here in London either. It's in New York, in Central Park. Now, it stood for a long period of time in Heliopolis, where it was built, which is modern-day Cairo, really. And then it was moved by the time when the Egyptians were ruled by the ancient Greeks. It's often known as the Ptolemaic period, and that's when Queen Cleopatra ruled, the famous Cleopatra, hence why this is called Cleopatra's Needle, because she'd moved it from ancient Cairo to Alexandria on the coast, and it stood there. And it stood there with actually another monument called Pompey's Pillar. Anyway, at some point it fell down, and it was buried in the sand for thousands of years, nearly 2,000 years. Hence why you can still see the inscription so much. It hasn't been weathered away because it just was quite literally buried in the Egyptian sands. Anyway, by 1819, Egypt unfortunately had got into a bit of debt with the British, and so had decided, why don't we offer you this ancient Egyptian artifact that we had? And that was in 1819. It didn't come until 1870s, and actually the story of it coming here to London is extraordinary. But let's first look actually what's on the obelisk. Now, it might be hard to see, but you might be able to see that there is a slightly more worn layer of hieroglyphics down the middle, and they were the original inscriptions put on there by Thutmose to celebrate him, and etc., etc. But you'll notice as well there are lines either side of the middle bit which are a little bit more visible. They were put on 200 years later by the great Pharaoh Ramesses III. More on him when we go to the British Museum. But that's essentially what it says on there. They are guarded by the sphinxes. Let's have a talk about them. Here is the Sphinx that guards the Cleopatra's Needle. There is another one on the other side over there. Now, these are not from ancient Egypt. They were built at the time when this was erected in the late 1870s. And they're actually historically inaccurate. Why? The Sphinx are there to guard the monument, to guard Cleopatra's monument here. But if that was the case, they should be pointing the other way. They're meant to point away from the monument to looking at any attackers or onlookers in guarding them. They should not be looking towards the monument. So these sphinxes are historically inaccurate. Now, a quick story of how this obelisk got here to London, because it's extremely heavy. It's a massive piece of granite carved from off the banks of the Nile in Aswan 3,000 years ago, as I was saying. But you'll note in the plaque, there's a plaque on the bottom at the base of Cleopatra's Needle to 6 men who actually died whilst bringing this over. How did they die? What was the story? Well, it's extraordinary. So it was almost too heavy to put on any boat, really, at that time, along with everything else that goes in the boat. So what they had to do is they had to design this huge iron cylinder kind of thing, and it was attached to a boat at Alexandria, and they took it along the sea that way. So this needle, this big obelisk, was in this almost like a giant gas can, or aluminium can almost. It was made from cast iron, rolling around. Anyway, it got to the Bay of Biscay, and by that time, the Bay of Biscay is notoriously very rough and ready. The cylinders started to roll and roll and roll uncontrollably, and unbelievably, it detached from the boat. Now, the boat that was carrying it was called the Cleopatra, and 6 men from there took out a tugboat to try and rescue the cylinder, But unfortunately, this waves of the Bay of Biscay took them and they died in trying to rescue this. So it looked like disaster. 6 men had died. That is a disaster, of course. But even as well as that, it looked as if the needle had been lost because that cylinder just went off into the Atlantic. Unbelievably, 5 days later, a Spanish fishing boat found this random cylinder rolling around in the sea. So they managed to get it, and word came about that this was the missing needle, and it came here, there. So we very nearly lost this Cleopatra's Needle before it even got to London. A final really random story of Cleopatra's Needle. It's amazing, this thing. It's got so many stories attached to it. The most very interesting thing is there's a time capsule buried under here that when it was erected in 1879 under this plinth, they put a time capsule of various different interesting things from Victorian England, the pictures of Victoria, some coinage, stamps, etc. But very interesting, there's photographs of the 12 most beautiful ladies of England. I don't know what propelled them to put that and what connection, maybe to Cleopatra and her beauty, I don't know, but how random is that? There's just the pictures of the most beautiful ladies in England in the base underneath these steps. Now behind me, hidden behind all the Christmas decorations and the bunting and the awning, etc., just about to see it there, is a statue of the Egyptian goddess Sekhmet. Now, this statue dates from the 14th century BC. It's slightly younger than Cleopatra's Needle, and this statue here of Sekhmet is the oldest statue in London, because Cleopatra's Needle is considered a monument rather than a statue. This actually is of, well, not a person, but sort of thing, living thing. Who was Sekhmet? Well, Sekhmet was the goddess, was a protector of pharaohs, and it's said that her breath created the deserts of Egypt. So she's there to sort of look over and protect, a bit like a sphinx, but maybe a little bit more benevolent and benign than a sphinx, not aggressive as well. Why is it there until Sotheby's? Well, in the 1850s, a person bought this for £40 on auction, but they never turned up. And £40 and then was worth about £5,000. They never turned up, so Sotheby's waited and waited and waited, and so it's kind of maybe still waiting for them. Somebody claimed. For the moment, it's looking after Sotheby's over there. It's now worth £3.5 million, so it might be a good idea for that person to maybe claim it. But there you have the statue of Sekhmet here on New Bond Street, just outside Sotheby's. I'm going to head into the British Museum now, but through the back entrance. A bit of a trick there. I think it's usually a lot less busy. Behind me, looming over everyone, is Ramesses II. He's the chap who built the inscriptions on the later inscriptions on Cleopatra's Needle. He really is one of the greatest pharaohs. Major battles into Syria, down into Nubia. He's from the New Kingdom, one of the slightly later period. He built all sorts of amazing palaces, including Karnak. He probably gets my vote as the greatest pharaoh. And here he is in the British Museum, looming over us. And here is a statue of King Thutmose, the man who built Cleopatra's Needle. Unfortunately, he's lost his head, though. But this is a rather interesting statue of him holding hands with gods, etc. And this would have been in the middle of a room, which is quite interesting, compared to some of the other statues we have here in the British Museum. In the glass case where all those people are is the Rosetta Stone. But one of the most famous artifacts here at the British Museum. It's actually not that old in Egyptian standards. It's from the Greek time, around the time of Cleopatra. But the reason why it's so significant is at the bottom of the base, some writing in ancient Greek, and at the top is writing in ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. This is the reason why we are able to understand ancient Egyptian culture. We're able to understand the language because we're able to translate it from the ancient Greek, which people knew, into the ancient Egyptian. So a very, very important artifact. Here's an example of the worship of cats. They used to mummify them as well as be incredible symbols of justice and peace, etc., and power. One thing you can see here in the British Museum are mummies. This is the mummification process. These are from the later period. That would be the sarcophagus that they would be in, wrapped up in here. And actually, they are pretty well preserved in there. But, perhaps we should have a little bit of respect for the dead here. Now, we all love the British Museum, of course, but it's extremely busy and it's hard to really get up and close to many of the things because there's so many people there. So actually, I've come now to the University College London, specifically to the place behind me, a rather unassuming entrance called to the Petrie Museum of Egyptian Archaeology. And you can get really up and close and personal to really some interesting things. They've got some incredible stuff in there. They have some clothes, actual clothes, a sort of tunic and a bead dress, what ancient Egyptians would wear. They have a pot burial, which is actually a mummy that's been buried in a pot, and the skeleton is still there. They have some amazing tablets with some really good hieroglyphics on it, and you can get much closer to here than you can at the British Museum. They have some really interesting portraits that would go on top of the sarcophagus of what the person actually looked like from the later period, which I really like. But definitely my most favourite thing in there are the shabti. They are these little tiny figurines of sort of mini sarcophagus. And the whole point of them was that the ancient Egyptians believed that when they died and they went into an afterlife, they would have to do manual labour. Now, if you're a high-ranking Egyptian, you wouldn't want to do some labour. So you took these little figurines and they are the ones who would do the hard labour for you. So even in death, there was a sort of slavery and hierarchy, which is extraordinary. This is Richmond Avenue in Islington, and these houses were built in the 1840s. At that time, Britain was having, or the early 19th century, Britain was having an Egypt mania, which had stemmed from the Battle of the Nile, where Nelson and the Brits gave Napoleon one of his many bloody noses, huzzah! And so this celebration of Nelson and the British Army, specifically their battles and their victories in Egypt. And so many of these houses along here have got rather nice sphinxes and columns which have the word Nile written on them. This building is the Carreras cigarette factory, built in the 1920s in the Egyptian revitalized sort of style, as it were. And you can see the lovely columns that we looked at. There used to be, when it was originally built, a big sundial representing the Egyptian god Ra, the sun god. But of course, you've got the cats, those amazing cats that stand guard over this. Now, why was this built in this style? It was built in the 1920s, and this was that second Egyptian revival. We saw the first after the Battle of the Nile, and we saw that in Richmond Avenue. This happened in the 1920s after Howard Carter, who coincidentally is buried in Putney Vale Cemetery, so watch the Alexander Kerensky video for that one. But he discovered Tutankhamun's tomb in there, and it caused a huge stir, news everywhere, and it created this Egyptian style of building buildings. And this is by far, in Morning's Crescent, must be the biggest and the best example for it. Now, cats in ancient Egypt, what is that all about? We saw those cats in the British Museum. Well, cats are a symbol of fertility, of justice and power. Many, many gods, including Sekhmet, who we saw at Sotheby's, were often represented in cats. So that's why they stand here in front of this wonderful Egyptian-style building. Well, let's end where we began, here at the British Museum. I hope you've enjoyed that. I hope you go and see some of these ancient Egyptian sites when they're not too busy. Don't forget to watch all my other videos, and please don't forget to subscribe. Thank you ever so much, and I'll see you on the next one.